welcome to episode 104. I'm Jack.
And I'm Jeff.
And we're pleased to have Kelly Lamrock with us, New Brunswick's youth and child advocate. So great to have you on here. Jody sends his regrets. He can't make it tonight. He's got a prior commitment, but that's too bad.
I'll take it personally. I love the set is amazing, guys. I feel like Archie and Edith Bunker should be singing those for the days in the corner. This is just awesome. Right?
Yeah, well, we got to thank Chad Ingram, our producer and production extraordinaire, for coming on board with CHCO TV. And we're live on CHCO TV and on Facebook and on YouTube, so we welcome any of your comments. But it's great to have you here. We've had 104 shows, a few years here. I can't believe it's the first time you're on the show. We haven't had you sooner.
Obviously, there are 103 people you like better than me, so that's okay. I take no offense.
Don't forget the people that haven't been able to come on yet that we've asked.
That's true. I don't know how many turned it down even this week.
Well, you'll never know.
That's fair. That's fair.
Well, wow, you've had quite a career, really, and it's longevity. You've been elected. You've been in the trenches in the legislature and the Minister of Education, Social Development, and now New Brunswick's youth and child advocate.
Yeah.
And you've been that for a couple of years.
Different perspective for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all interesting, all those angles, but yeah, it's a lot of fun. No, it's obviously nice to get to focus on issues and seniors as well, but issues I'm passionate about. Obviously, the social side's important, and we take it very seriously. Obviously, you work with the legislature, but children don't vote, and they don't generally donate money to parties. They don't always have a voice, and it's good to kind of be that person that gives MLAs a resource to say, well, look, let me look at it from that lens that you might not get lobbied on otherwise. And I found most MLAs from all sides really good to work with and interested in trying to do a good job, and I think we all know most are. Right?
Yeah. So you're a seniors advocate as well.
Yeah. That's
okay.
right.
So I missed that on the title. So
that's all right. When I applied for the job, I just look at that. Someone added seniors to it. In fact, we have a report coming out next month on the long-term care system, and hopefully looking at how we can do a better job keeping some of the promises we really make and that we all want when we age. We've done about 6 months of consultations.
Oh, wow.
So even one of the fascinating things, and you'll see this in the report, is I tried to reach out to folks who might be interns or nursing students. It's kind of like this. When I was a legislative page, which was one job I had as a teenager, the folks who bring coffee and notes. People were nicer to me as a minister, but it was always interesting that some of the former MLAs who were there, it's like, yeah, I remember the way you acted when I was a page. I think sometimes you hear more truth. They clean up the place if the advocate comes. Nursing students see, and there's a serious side to that is, I remember some of the stories that stayed with me. One nursing student I remember told me a story about a fellow, he had mobility issues. He was out for his day watching TV, and the student was ending her shift, and he said, could you get me back to my bed? And she said, well, I'm just going, I'll put the request in. And he started to cry, and he said, look, if you don't get me back to my bed now, I'm going to be stuck here for hours.
Yeah.
We've got to take a real fundamental look at how is this happening. We've got seniors in hospital beds who shouldn't be there. The staff is focused on crises, and often they're falling through the cracks. It's not a place, and we're going to hopefully make some recommendations that'll help us look at how to get seniors into
the appropriate
place, and with some autonomy. Right. My goodness, I would go nuts not being able to turn on the TV or get up from a chair when I wanted to, and we've got to find a way to fix that.
Yeah. So one of the things we hear about, Kelly, for the long-term care facilities is that they just cannot get the staff complement. Right. Do you include recommendations on those challenges? Because as you know, if you don't have the staff, you can't fill that bed.
It's a really good point, Jeff.
It's just a domino effect on the whole system. So do you guys talk about that in your report?
We're going to look at it, not only the specific issues, like what we could do through the community college system are there particular jobs, and has the skill set evolved, just the way early childhood, and I know you've been involved with that, we thought, what does it take to be an educator? What is the human services needed? But there's a more fundamental problem, and I think something we'll do with this report that I think a lot of MLAs who have gotten to see the system up close will appreciate. It's not just sometimes about the social department. The way we organize government at the center is sometimes extremely wrong. For example, you've heard me make this point before. We have hard fiscal targets. Why when I ask the Department of Social Development, how many kids in care actually graduate high school? Do you know? No, we don't know. How many kids in care go on to university? Well, wouldn't that be an important target to hit? In this one, all of our human resources, really in the mid-90s, and we weren't the only province, but the government of the day, for a reason, said, look, we are now going to treat human resources and healthcare as a means of cost control. We can't charge for services. We don't want to start rationing services the way HMOs do in the private market. No one wants that. So the way to control costs is limit the number of doctors, limit the number of nurses, limit the number of healthcare workers, and people will take the services slower and will control costs. Well, the fiscal crisis changed, but we didn't change the management. So Treasury Board is still using essentially human resources models at cost control when the problem is recruitment, and we've dried up the supply down the line. So we need to rethink how we do that. It isn't the Department of Social Development isn't only responsible. No. The center needs to answer for its decisions.
Isn't it interesting though, numerous reports, you've been in government numerous years, Jeff, myself, but a lot of these reports and action plans, a lot of them, and it's not any one government, they don't necessarily have the right and detailed benchmarks, measurements.
No.
Some do, like the really great ones do have that all across government, not just in long-term care, but I'm glad you mentioned about what truly is success here. What is our outcome and how do we measure it? So finally we can say, are we doing a good job or not?
Well, and we don't know. And in fact, that trickles down to how we manage government. I often say we work on a compliance model,
right,
not a results model. So let me give you an example. We're doing a look now at child poverty and family poverty. Social workers are first responsible for not varying from the criteria and not exceeding the budget. Whether or not the family actually gets off of social assistance and into the workplace in 3 years, if I asked today, how many people actually leave the social assistance system for work, no one could tell me, let alone what region does it best, what social worker does it best. And so why are we then surprised when we hear that social workers who aren't allowed to make judgment calls about the goal, we have no goal. If we said instead, we are going to measure how many people move from social assistance to work, maybe you don't nickel and dime somebody on a bus pass to get to a job interview. Maybe you don't, as I remember, this is an old policy, but I remember somebody telling me it stuck really in their head that somebody once said, well, remember, if your teenager babysits, we have to claw back that money because that's family income. Well, heaven forbid, someone whose parents are on social assistance might actually learn to work for a living. But you wouldn't do it that way, but we don't. We essentially put a lot of people in the place where we followed all the rules. It's kind of like we did the operation by the book. The patient died, but still it's a success because we followed the rules.
So that's like when you mentioned about the long-term care report coming out here in a few weeks, and you've been working on that for 6 months or so?
We did consultations for a number of months. Jeff will know about this. Some folks in the legislature decided we should do an inquiry into 713, so we had to take a break for a couple of months and do that, then get back to it, which we didn't mind doing. But I
remember hearing something.
I saw something in the news about that. And
give us an idea of what triggers the LTC report. Care report.
We asked social development if we could do it, and they actually, to their credit, they've given me a budget and said no strings attached. You use it, but you can take on staff, run a proper consultation, and see if you can figure it out. So, I think I'm just putting the finishing pages out. It's probably close to 100 pages. We've got a few themes that we're going to take a look at.
Well, in really 6 months, like the news cycle and things happen so much quicker now in 1 month, 6 months, 2 years. How do you keep the dust from off that so it's current even over 6 months? Things change so much.
Well, one thing we started doing that's fun, and this is a couple of other things we're getting out the door now, we started doing what are called monitoring reports. So it used to be you'd throw the report out, people would kick, and maybe 5 years later somebody would go, whatever happened to that report?
It's on the shelf with the 20,000 other reports.
Yeah. Right, yeah. So we actually now come back every year to year and a half and say to the department, so tell us where you are. So we did that on, as you know, the mental health, the youth mental health report with Lexi Dakin. We updated that, and in fact, I think you folks invited me in to talk about that. Then the next one is actually going to be, we've got the child protection report as we are now proclaiming the Youth Wellbeing Act. How many of those recommendations have been implemented? Where are we? So we just keep coming back, and what we are is we're a nonpartisan tool of saying, hey, to the legislative branch, you hold the executive accountable, the folks, all 49. Let me tell you what I'm seeing. What you do with it is up to you. I'm not elected. but here's the information. You can then ask better questions or say where you think you're happy or not.
Well, I'm looking forward to that report because we know now to see the solutions. That's the hard part, is the solution. A lot of people can pinpoint the problems. My father-in-law was in the hospital for 5 months a couple of years ago with dementia.
Yeah.
Not the best place to be, better than and safer than home, but just hard spot. And then I know people stories of in nursing homes currently, sitting, in their seat, had to go to the back, couldn't make it to the bathroom, sitting there for a few hours, 3, 4, 5 hours, and you're hearing probably a lot of that. But
a lot of
Jeff hit it on the nails. It's a lot and due part of shortage of workers. But we're really looking forward to this. Really looking forward to this report.
And we're going to have to treat that as an urgent benchmark problem. I think, as you said,
the problem's not going away anytime soon. We've still got that bubble of that age demographic that's working through the system, right? So
we do, and
we're not far from it.
Well, and as a Gen Xer,
in our 50s here,
we are.
Maybe close.
We are, and I think one thing that really dawned on me is we should remember that is that. I think sometimes we are seeing a number of social systems right now that are struggling on a lot of fronts. Some of that is because the way, as I said, the way we've managed it at the center is broken as a governance model. But I think I think a lot of us, we try and go on and live our lives not thinking that it could be us someday, but the reality is
it will be.
We're either old or dead. It's not much of a choice, but there it is.
Right.
And I'd like it fixed before we all get there, so you and I can fight in a proper nursing home on a political basis.
No kidding. Take us back to what got you interested in politics. How many years back now? Now, you don't have to put a number on it, but before our university, obviously. In university, you went to STU.
Yep.
And president of the Young Liberal Association there, or how did that go?
I was president of the Young New Democrats at the time. I'm nonpartisan now, but I can tell you that, I guess. Yeah, and I mostly, as you know, got into student politics. I was head of the national student group, and I think I'm still the only guy who's been student union president at UNB and STU. So, that was the one. If there's ever a worst bar trivia question in the world, no one cares. No one cares. So you can win a bar bet with that.
Trivia, no one cares. That's a great topic.
How I got into it. So I was 9 years old, and my dad let me stay up to watch the leaders debate. It was 1979, so you can do the math on that.
Yeah.
And so it was Pierre Trudeau, Joe Clark, and Ed Broadbent. And if you had to watch a political debate that would turn you on instead of off of politics, they were longer form answers in those days. People actually let people talk instead of just tweeting at each other. And whatever your politics, 3 outstanding debaters of substance. At the time, at 9, Ed Broadbent resonated with me. So he seemed so sincere. He seemed to answer the question in a very direct way. And I think anyone who knows Ed knows he, agree or disagree, he was in it for the right reasons. So a week later, a letter arrived at the house, and it was a fundraising form letter from the NDP.
No kidding.
Now, you may know I come from a very Tory family. My great uncle R.B. Hansen was federal MP and federal leader for the Conservative Party. Tory family to the roots. So no one in my family wanted this rather unwelcome orange intervention. I took my allowance, which was a $1 bill, and I put it in an envelope, and I wrote Ed Broadbent a letter telling him how much I liked him and how much I appreciated what he said about, helping the poor and getting people out of poverty and people paying their fair share and all the things that 9-year-olds probably do believe in. And I wrote it, please give this to Mr. Broadbent. Well, darned if somebody didn't actually do that. And a few weeks later, a letter with the House of Commons stamp arrived, and it was a very nice handwritten note from Mr. Broadbent. We exchanged letters over the years, and that sort of lit the fire in me. It's funny, I got to meet him when I was Minister of Social Development. He came as part of you remember the poverty reduction thing, because we worked together on that across party lines at the time. It was an excellent process, and everyone of all parties worked hard on it. I was like, that Big Bang Theory every episode where Sheldon meets Professor Proton. I was that. And he was lovely. He was lovely.
That's really cool.
It is a cool story.
And then university got involved with politics, university politics, and then what your first election was at 2003?
2003. Yeah, I didn't plan to, but somebody, I never like to talk too much take the words then now, because I am nonpartisan, but some leader knocked on my door and said, I need you. And, I think sometimes in New Brunswick, it often happens that way. It's sometimes what party you wind up in is a bit of a function of who had the help wanted sign out at the time.
Wow.
Hardly true.
Yeah.
Well, you were great at your opposition house leader as well, I think.
Yeah, I was.
In those days, like 2003 to 2006, you formed government in 2006. But you could stand up if there was an issue, like right away, and somehow get the book out and figure out and be able to argue it. And very effective, very, very effective. I just wanted to say that.
Well, that's really kind of you.
Very skilled, effective.
It's nicer than what you said in those days.
Yes, it is. Sorry for all those.
No, well, me too, probably. I always have to say that
see
too.
this comment.
Oh, no,
you can read it out loud if you want, from Bruce Northrup. Next leader of the NDP of New Brunswick.
I like my job now, but it's always nice to hear from Bruce.
Bruce is watching from Nova Scotia.
Nova Scotia, yeah, great.
Bruce moved to Nova Scotia a few years back.
Did he? Okay, well, I hope he's doing well.
So this week, well, actually, a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was just a week, Minister Fleming, the Attorney General, came out and talked about a little bit of gap in some legislation that Cabinet caught and proclaimed the legislation at that time. Now this week he's sending that, and I don't know, maybe you understand what the question is better than anybody, but sending a question to the Court of Appeal to talk about what that meant, what the gap meant, I guess, actually, for child protection. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Maybe I can explain a bit
Being a
about
former legislator yourself and the cabinet minister.
And maybe
tell us how sometimes those things happen.
Public that this one. Let me say right away, I have no intention of dunking on anyone for it. In fact, it came about because of a bill that, if you recall, many of the changes were ones I'd been pushing the legislature to make. So there's an old act for child protection. Mm-hmm. Government passed a new act that was better in many ways. In fact, when I proposed 9 amendments. I think 8 of them became law. Thank you for that. Government listened, and
historic had you on the floor of the legislature even at that time.
Yeah, well, you did. And
late at night.
Government doesn't often open up a bill after it's a majority government. So I mean, government listened, and I'm appreciative of that. And then they even went back, and this may be where the problem happened. They said, okay, so this bill's done. We have to write some regulations and polish it up. So we won't proclaim it yet. The old one's still in effect. Mm-hmm. Then they made more amendments to the new bill because I said, actually, I'd like to see more child rights in there. Mm-hmm. And the government again said, okay. And there's some good stuff. The right for an educational program, the right to have your extracurriculars and social life done, the right to be consulted when you move group homes, which really matters to kids' care, right to be free of corporal punishment. It's a good. And they also said, gee, while we're doing it, we should put in that language repealing the old bill. Right. And the bill passed, amending the new bill. Except this time when the lieutenant governor came in and waved her magic wand and said it's now law, there's sort of one sentence would normally be there. They forgot to separate the repeal clause and say that also has to wait.
Right.
So once Bill 9 passed, it repealed the old one, but didn't proclaim the new one.
Right.
Sorry, folks, if at home that probably still. So it's the kind of thing. It happens in every province every few years, and sometimes it happens on like the Labor Board Act, and it's less. But this one's big. So for a few weeks, we technically had no child protection bill, and apparently no one noticed. No judges, no lawyers raised it. The judges kept giving orders, and then, as you say, so caught it.
Everybody assumes it's written there.
Well, I mean, I saw the bill too, guys, and I wouldn't be screening it for that. I'd be looking at the policy stuff, but who checks a proclamation clause other than professional drafters? And look. Sure, ideally everyone would be perfect, but I watched TV and I saw Patrick Mahomes throw an interception too. It doesn't mean you have a royal commission on it. Right. So government actually, they found it. I actually woke up one morning and had 2 very very alert deputy minister saying we should probably fill you in on what we're doing. Government is identifying the cases that it might affect. They're making sure the parents have someone at a desk to call if there's any issue. They're monitoring the courts. We're involved. I have a direct line. If I see anything that's at risk, I have a direct line to call. So they're doing everything right. And so what they're doing now is Cabinet can go quickly to the Court of Appeal and find out what the law is. It's been done a few times. I did it once as Attorney General. It's a way of cutting the line going, look, it'll all be better. And eventually what government can probably do is pass a law and say, look, retroactively anything done fixes it. But courts also might generally have sometimes under certain criteria also just said, look, if we have evidence it was an error, we'll just...
Right, the intention is
asking, and I've heard some people say, well, why don't we recall the legislature today?
Yeah, I'm getting that too.
I'm comfortable with what government's doing, and I'll tell you why, because I've gotten that question. So here's the thing, is the Court of Appeal can say to all the lower courts, here's what we will and won't fix. Here's the holes government's going to have to fix. Here's what they don't. If government passes a retroactivity bill before the Court of Appeal comes in, they're guessing where the holes are. The Court of Appeal can tell us. If government passes a bill, family lawyers still, if they see some way to help their client by challenging things, they still have to do it. Well, family courts are backed up, frankly enough. That's one thing we got to get that caseload down, and there's some good stuff coming out of justice on that. But I don't want 20 lawyers rushing in with new questions, plugging up the lower courts. Let's get the Court of Appeal. Then the legislature should meet and fix it. So it's just, I think it's the right order. I think government is doing the right order here.
Yeah. Well, what makes the sense? What's going to make it smoother? What's not going to make it worse for people? And maybe calling the legislature doing that could make it more complicated, more...
Before we call the plumber, let's find out exactly which taps are leaking and which ones aren't. And the Court of Appeal can tell us
So basically, to simplify things, the people that enforce child protective services or adoption services were still doing their jobs.
Oh yeah,
Under the premise that they were doing their job as they normally would, with the same intention to protect the children. Court orders for...
Judge still gave an order under the Family Services Act. It just didn't actually exist at the time. But all the things happened.
So is that the issue that could become an issue, even though everybody was doing, intentionally doing the right thing as far as they knew, is like mostly so the kids that were removed from homes weren't legally taken from homes?
Right. It could be that. So if a judge signed an order saying I'm giving custody to the minister or I'm placing a child here.
Right.
Technically, the act they did it under didn't exist and they didn't have the authority to do it. Somebody who wanted to challenge that, and there will be very few, because again, it was a very small period of time, and contested matters take several days, so there wouldn't have been more than a handful. But if somebody was aggrieved, they could come back and say, well, I want that order ignored because the law didn't exist.
Right.
And maybe the court would, maybe they wouldn't. The Court of Appeal will tell us if the legislature passes it retroactively. I think the only area that could be affected is it might be a little tougher if there's a provincial offenses like failure to report. I have no knowledge that any of that happened.
Right.
Civil law, you can often retroactively say that law was there. As you can imagine, if somebody is charged in a criminal context or a quasi-criminal context, you can't retroactively say you broke a law that didn't exist because the defendant's rights start to matter there. But the children, which are my concern, as of right now, all those orders are still being followed and there's no sign that any actual impact has been felt.
So when you go to bed tonight, you're not tossing and turning over this, and nor should New Brunswickers.
I'm not tossing and turning. I'll be vigilant. That's my job. I'm paid to do it. And as I said, the government officials are being vigilant. If I see anything, they will be on it, and they've given me that assurance. And they've proclaimed the new bill, so they've solved the problem. The minute they discovered it, they solved it. So it's really just, did anything happen in those 7 weeks we can't fix? I think we can.
And nobody was put in harm's way.
As of right now, I have no reason to believe anything.
Right.
Because everyone's still, again, no one raised
was
it.
put in danger or put in a place where they shouldn't be. It's basically
social
a protection.
If social workers took a child out of a dangerous situation and the judge assigned them somewhere, that happened.
Right.
It's only and none of it's been undone. It's just technically somebody could go to court and say, were they allowed to?
Kids out of a bad situation. And before that happens, we're going to, if that happens, the legislature can plug that hole. Right.
Well, that's good. I'm glad we had that
Well,
I just heard
it's
about
good
it.
to have the discussion because,
it is.
I mean, as time goes on, as you know, it takes time for the news cycle to go through, and most people that aren't paying attention to the whole thing wouldn't have caught Ted's original press release on a Friday 2 weeks ago, let's say.
No.
This week, it would gain a little more, more questions be raised, and as time goes on, as you know, it comes up and comes up and comes up more, and then people are like, what's going on here? But to have the discussion here and put it in layman's terms for people, and we can all be critical of our own government sometime, but
I mean, it's
Like
my
you said.
professional job description, but on this one, I think, short of never make a mistake, I think it's unfortunate it happened. It's not unheard of. Every province goes through this from time to time. And I think right now it's being effectively dealt with and monitored.
So you've got several reports. It's child, youth, and seniors. That's a huge span. Several reports you've already done. The long-term care report for seniors is just in the final stages and will be released soon. How many inquiries or complaints does your office get a year?
We get, we've gone up about 50% in the last year and a half.
Wow.
I think maybe we've been in the news a little. As you know, we in the 2 years before I was appointed, we did 2 reports. We've done 18 in the last 2 years. So we're out there a bit more, and I think people now are suddenly thinking to call us.
and our population's increasing too.
And our population.
So there's got to be a correlation between, and who knows what the percentage
I'm
is.
53 and I just had a new baby. Hi, Molly. So
Yeah, you're
I know. Nice.
contributing to the tax base.
I think you guys. I don't
Appreciate
know where
that.
my certificate is, but I think I did my part. Thank you.
Let's get a pen here. Congratulations,
I'm
Kelly.
keeping this.
How do you do it?
Let's
I know.
get into how. I don't want you guys are going to get canceled.
That's another whole show. That's another whole
Oh yeah,
show.
the birds and the
Sue
bees.
Johansson had that show. I don't.
Suya Hansen, yes. Sunday night.
The answer to your original question is that I think we're on track to do about 1,600 complaints this year.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, I'll throw in a plug. We have the lowest funding per capita of any child advocate's office in the country, and others don't have seniors. But we got a very big increase last year, and these things take time. We're moving. We're starting to catch. We're starting to catch the guy in ninth, and the staff does a great job.
The momentum's in your favor.
The momentum's in our favor. We're thundering there. We're at least moving the right way, unlike the literacy scores. So I think we're gonna. I think 1,600 is a lot.
It is.
And some are very complex. Some can be fixed with a call, but it's not unlike the job of an MLA.
Right.
What I can sometimes do is, we have frontline people, they escalate files when they see something really wrong. I can sort of cut through a lot of what you might have to go through as a citizen. I can get right to the top people and say, I'm sure this is not the result you intended, is it? And we have a pretty good civil service. Part of the time when you say this isn't right, half the time somebody says it is not, and we get it resolved. So.
It's kind of quite something how your experience as elected MLA and then the social development and education minister. You had to do a lot of that inquiries, and we got to know on this, minister, is there a way that this could be reviewed and checked again? And well, I have to say, like, I was in opposition, you were in government, and there was a few times when I needed you, when not me per se, but my constituents. And I can remember one I'll never ever forget. They helped someone needing the help that they needed with had a colostomy bag, and you helped just get it reviewed, really, and that's what it needed, was just another set of eyes.
Well, social development especially is the minister who often has to do that in the House, and I think people at home should know this too. It looks like there's a lot of fight. You'd be amazed. I always liken it to that sheepdog and coyote on Bugs Bunny. They pound each other and the whistle blows and they go have lunch together. You always, even if 3 minutes ago we were screaming at each other, someone come and say, look, it isn't whether you're even still mad at the person. This is a vulnerable person. Can we get it done? And the social development ministers like Mado Dubé that I worked with did the same thing. Jody did the same thing when I was even a private citizen. And so that happens. People try and remember that we're there to help people, especially in those vulnerable areas. I remember a great issue that you raised, and it was one where, again, I don't know if you've forgotten this, but there was one social development had a dumb policy, and I was minister, and Jack caught it, is they had $1,000 benefit for people in disabilities. if for people below a certain income threshold. If you went $1 over the income, they took all $1,000 back instead of gradually.
Right.
And someone went like $3 over in Jack's riding.
Yeah,
and
they got their $1,000 canceled out.
Right. And so you came to see me, and I remember you asked the question, and I kind of got up and, instead of doing the Mr. Speaker, the honorable member should always party as terrible people. I said, Mr. Speaker, I think that's right, and I'm going to go. Now, the funny part is, for some reason, I told the bureaucrats to do it, and I had a good team. They were very busy. Yeah. But you'd come back every few little, did you do it yet? No. So I would actually, you help me come, I'd go, would you ask me that question again so people know I'm in trouble? And so we would kind of work it out to make sure the right thing. What I remember saying is, folks, I can change policy with a signature. I'm going to write it on a napkin and sign it tomorrow at 5 o'clock. If you don't want me to do that, get that policy on my desk properly drafted. But again, it's one where, sure, there's the stuff where you're going to disagree and you're going to have the fight. But I think MLAs do a good job of remembering every once in a while, let's work together to get the right thing done.
Well, I know when I started working for Jody as a ZA in 2010, I would obviously have access to a lot of his correspondence and files and things, and I would search different files or different topics and see correspondence between you and Jody, or Jody and Victor Boudreau, or whoever, just reaching out to the other side, to the minister on the other side, because at the end of the day, it's your constituents they're the ones that need the help. And you can fight and bicker back all you want, but it's not you and I that need the help, it's people on the ground that matters. And, and you guys knew that, and you worked that way. And yeah, we hold you accountable in question period, and we get held accountable in question period, and that's the way it should be.
Well, you want to win because there are areas where you would genuinely do things differently. You want the chance to do it, and that's the system we have. Is sometimes you have to make that argument to people, and but you remember that in the meantime, we're also there to get the right thing done for individuals.
Absolutely. Just more people. Well, I think most ministers understand that.
Yeah.
You get the odd one here and there that really want to be political, and it doesn't do anybody any good because it makes your critic upset then.
Yeah, and frankly, half the time your own side polices it. We guys who are too partisan usually be someone on our side. Hey, come on, man. And
tone her down.
I know sometimes, sometimes with me it would even be, look, I know there were guys who went and said, would you please answer Kelly's email? Otherwise, he's going to get up in question period, and none of us are going to enjoy it. So just fix the problem.
Exactly.
Well, that's effective opposition.
It's a tool you have, right?
It is. And that's why it's important to have a balance of opposition in the government. There's a role for that. So, medical assistance in dying. You mentioned about the long-term care report.
You saved a really tough question for last.
I did, and we've only got a few minutes, but I wanted to get that in there.
Extended it again, I guess, is the latest.
Yes, for people with mental health.
If in the last mental health report, I did raise this issue, so I feel I can speak about it a bit. I have to say I'm very concerned by what the federal government's doing. Here's where I'm getting bothered is the Supreme Court has said that in the end each of us have a right to control our destiny in that way, and I respect the Supreme Court's decision. However, there are two things. One, I'm glad they scrapped the idea of mature minors, but they're extending this to mental health. There is a disconnect to me if you have a right to end your life for mental health, but you don't have a right to services that alleviate mental health, and you don't. Right. And there isn't even anything in the process that says, if we provided these services, you can have medical assistance in dying if your suffering is intolerable. But there's no mandatory step to review whether or not there are services that could exist that would render your suffering at an end. Right. And so I'm profoundly uncomfortable, and we have heard stories nationally of, somebody shows up to talk to you about your options in medical assistance, but nobody came to ask you what services you need. There was a case...
Or you've received.
Or you've received. There was a case a while ago with somebody who had severe, I believe it was environmental illness, and they could not find a house that didn't cause their trigger, but nobody did the housing search. And so I don't, there is nothing progressive to me about saying that you can end your life by right, but you have no right to services that might make life bearable. And until that is fixed, I think government needs to follow the advice they're getting from some corners and hit the pause on this.
Yeah. And so I'm glad you mentioned that. So.
Yeah, it puts it pretty plain.
Yeah. In your role, of all the sort of complaints and the cluster of complaints, what is it that you would, if you could fix the most?
Oh, wow. I still think for me, and I go back to this point that we manage by going through the steps rather than saying what's the result. And we should be measuring and holding frontline workers accountable, not for their compliance with the rules, but with the results they achieve. It's the individual things that stay with me. I think of, the senior I heard about in a bed who broke down crying because she'd made a dietary request for 5 or 6 days and no one listened. And can you, you ever go home and you just need a beer in 5 minutes? And I can't imagine just losing autonomy to that point. I think of the kid, and this was one, in fact, this is one of the things that led to the amendments you folks made on the child protection bill. But, the child who said they moved my group home assignment without checking with me. Someone showed up, I put all my stuff in a garbage bag. I didn't have time to get my friend's number. I had a big part in the school play and I didn't get to do it because
very disruptive. It's
disruptive, and that's part of why we have the right for children to be consulted now in legislation. I shared that story and MLA's, I think got it. It's those individual stories that stay with. The one right now that I do think we got to change is we got too many kids home on partial days. It's become a bit of an epidemic. I think a child
home from school on partial days.
Child acts up or has some issues staying with the program. We call mom and dad. In some cases, moms and dads are losing jobs or going on social assistance and because they're being told to pick up. And sometimes when I ask the school, well, okay, what's the rule? Well, he'll come back an hour, and if he doesn't escalate, then we'll go to 2 hours, we'll go to 3. Well, what service is he getting the rest of the day? Oh, we don't have any service. Well, no. If the child was struggling before and you send him home with no services and he comes back, why would you think the result is any different? And here's the number is highest of kids in care who, again, the minister is acting as a parent. They don't have a parent to advocate for them. We're seeing 1 in 10 kids are now not even in school on a full day, even though the Education Act says you have a right to an education. So we've got to find a solution to that. We should not have children at home when their peers are in school receiving nothing. If you have to provide services outside the classroom for a limited period of time to address a specific issue and return, do it. But the fact there are no resources there is... It's wrong, and frankly, it's another example of something you'll hear in the long-term care report. I think, how often do we avoid the tiny expenditure up front
pay for it.
And we pay for it later, right? Right now, you look at what's overwhelmed. Everything goes wrong, but you can't say no. If somebody's charged, they have to go to court. Everything goes wrong, but you can't say no at the emergency room. Everything goes wrong, but you can't say no to social assistance. Everything goes wrong, but you can't deny the child protection claim. All the things we should have been doing that we nickeled and dimed are fine. All the nets that were there are breaking because we kept pushing them off. And those are the people who have fallen through the cracks, and now the nets are breaking. That's bothering me, and I think we all have to, all of us with public influence collectively. And it happened over 30 years, as I said. I think you could trace a lot of this back to the mid-90s. All of us have to figure out a way to change the governance model so that we actually alleviate human suffering rather than follow the rules.
Well, and I mean, we would say, and I've seen budgets over the last few years, like there's a lot of surplus, but we've also increased a lot of budgets. But like you say, it's taken 30 years maybe to get here.
It has.
It's going to take a little time to change that and get out of it, but we all have a responsibility to try to push that to that limit, to that direction.
I think that's well said. And the one thing when I talk about changing the model, last budget I asked the Department of Finance, but in areas where there were increases, and often, it's frustrating as a minister, as an MLA. Sometimes you're like, I swear I asked for something different. Why is this happening? And I've been through that. And trust me, it's not that the ministers are bad. Hey, that happened when I was there too. I'm not dunking on anyone here.
Group therapy on this.
It's frustrating.
It is.
But part of it is, in some cases, I asked finance, basic things. All right, so that's an increase. Yes, we're very proud of it. How many people need the service? How quickly should they get it? What is the service standard? And how many people are needed to deliver it?
Yeah.
We have no idea, but we put more in.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't, if your budget is based on, we have no idea, but we wrote down some numbers and then finance backed it off a little, well, that's not how you make a budget.
No.
Well, we've really enjoyed it.
I guess for parting, anything you'd like to ask or anything you'd like to say, not ask.
Oh, say.
Sorry, Jeff.
Can oh, man, do I? Of all the MLAs you served with, who's the one you hope would lose? You have to either answer or eat this most. Is what I think
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
I can't believe I said that.
So we asked Mr. Finch last week, or maybe Jody asked him, of the three Carr brothers that you served with,
What
which
are
one do you
differences?
love the most?
Well, he said that second, but the main thing was what are the differences? What are the uniqueness, I guess, of each? But what he was getting
He never
at was
had the
which one
chance to serve with
I
me,
never
so-
served with you. I always liked.
Oh, yeah.
I liked both of them. Once I learned who was who, you know what? I mean, obviously, I think everyone knows that Jody and I. It was an unusual friendship, but a good one. I was his critic when we were first elected as young guns, and he was mine. And somehow we came out of it and stayed friends. Jody articled with me, and I mean, so I've gotten to know your whole family. It's an example of, again, the one thing it's funny, I don't think you'll mind me saying this much. I had lunch with Bernard Lord a while ago, and as you know, he and I had some epic question period battles. And I think both of us probably agreed. And is it like this for you guys? I've forgotten most of the fights or even what they were about. Those days that we all agreed on the Official Languages Act, or the days we did the poverty reduction thing and we ended we had the lowest single social assistance rate and we got rid of that together, or those are the things that I've forgotten the fights. I remember what we got done. Yeah. I don't know if it's like that for you guys.
Yeah, for the most part.
Yeah.
I do remember some of my QPs in opposition just battering with Billy Fraser or Serge Roussel on the Local Governance Act, but that was just, I felt, just the part of the job. But there were some wins when I was in opposition and in government that everybody really worked together on, and you remember those things.
Oh,
you do remember those.
And you remember some of the lines to this day. And TJ, forgive me if you're listening or if somebody tells you I told the story, but you remember the great line. One of the ones I remember, I was right there. Elizabeth Weir was in the end of her great legislative career, and TJ Burke was newly elected. He was speaking on a bill, and TJ, as you know, he's impeccably dressed.
Yes.
TJ's, I mean, here I am. You guys make me bad. TJ makes all of us look ridiculous. He's a gorgeous human being in every way, and he was impeccably dressed as he always is. And he stopped for a minute. He got fairly emotional. He said, "You know, Mr. Speaker, sometimes I go home and I look at myself in the mirror." And from behind him, Elizabeth Weir looked up and cackled, "Sometimes I didn't think you did anything else." And so you do remember some of the shots.
So good. So good.
She was so quick.
What a great way to...
Well, just one parting question from Nora Valentino.
Yeah.
Why do you cheer for the Green Bay Packers?
Well,
of the day.
Okay. You know what? I would say it's this. When I was 6, I remember I used to go to the library and I took out a book on Bart Starr, and then the same guy I read about, the uniform appeared on TV. But also, when I got older, I have a share in the Green Bay Packers. Why does Green Bay, Wisconsin, which by the way is smaller than St. John, New Brunswick, have an NFL team? They are community owned. They're called the Packers because they were purchased by the employees of the Green Bay Meat Packing Company back when the NFL was in Portsmouth, Ohio, and St. Cloud, Michigan. And for some reason, Green Bay, this community-owned team that doesn't have a billionaire owner, they actually are collectively owned by 800,000 people. And if they fail, they can't be sold. They have to dissolve and give their proceeds to the Green Bay Legion, which would be the best shuffleboard in town. So the fact there's this small town with a community-owned team with all the history. So yeah, I have one share in the Green Bay Packers. I am an NFL owner, and
There you have it.
I love their story.
Well, there you go,
There you go, Nora.
There you go, Nora.
That's
There's
a good
the
question.
answer. That's
Question
great.
of the day.
That's another great trivia question.
Great trivia question.
Yeah.
Well, Kelly,
Which
thanks.
football team does Kelly Lamrock own?
Yeah.
Yeah, one share.
Partially owned.
I'm calling him right now. Who got Aaron Rodgers traded? That was me.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, taking time out of your busy schedule, all these reports you've done, and protecting and advocating for children, youth, and seniors. Thanks,
Thank
Kelly.
you guys. It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
We want to thank our viewers for watching as well. Until next week, have a good night.
Have a great night. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, gents.